Hello everyone, welcome to our first YouTube lecture on period 6. Now period 6 is one of those very multifaceted time periods. There are so many things going on in America at this time period, 1865 to 1898. It is a time of great industry, of innovation, and the growth of capitalism. Sometimes we also call this the Gilded Age. We'll have a few other, obviously, videos on this because there's things that we're going to talk about with the agriculture and the agrarian revolution that's going to take place. We're going to look at immigration and the growth of urbanization in America. We're going to look at the labor movement in America. And also what happens to the Native Americans during this time period. There are so many different things we're going to look at. So I want you to get out your key concepts, and I want you to be thinking about what it is we're going to talk about and why it's so important. Just so you know, this is a time period of profound social and economic revolution in America. Right? America is even going to eventually emerge by 1898 as an imperialist nation. Although the Spanish-American War is in period 7, I will often allude to it here in this period as well. New giant corporations come to dominate the economy, and that's what we're going to focus on here, the growth of capitalism. But as I go through here, I also want you to think about a focus question. I want you to think about this question when you start taking your notes, and how would you answer it? What factors or causes, right? We do a cause-effect all the time. Combined, so more than one cause you need to look at to make the United States a mature industrial society after the Civil War. And then always think of the effects, both positive and negative, that will happen as well. Well, let's get right into it. We're in Key Concept 6.1, technological advances, large-scale production methods. All this, the opening of new markets, encouraged the rise of industrial capitalism in the United States. And remember, this is a basis of a contextualization point for you. Roman number 1, there are 3 things they're already giving you here. Remember, this could be a multiple choice question for you that helped this industrial production. We're going to get massive technological change we're going to talk about, an expanding international communication network, and a very pro-growth government policies to help capitalism. This very blurry picture over here to the side, I'm sorry about that, is a picture of a patent that Graham Bell got for his telephone, actually. So yes, communication networks are coming now. Let's look specifically at letter A. Here we see this pro-growth government policies, subsidies, right? The federal government either helping through monetary subsidies or, with the railroads case, land grant subsidies to help in transportation and later on even in communication systems. Here you see this checkerboard fashion of land. Here we're out in Wyoming, and they carve up this area into giant checkerboards. So as you built your railroad, you chose which checkerboard you would go in because of rivers, soft sand, mountain ranges, and eventually that land became your land, for the railroad, that is. You're supposed to give a lot of this land back after the fact to the government. Sometimes they did not, but it also helped to develop cities and towns in doing this. But this here is the government actually helping to build a transportation. If you think of a continuity and a change, let's put this in here real quick. A continuity and a change. We go back to the market revolution, right? Canals. You had men like Henry Clay in his American system. He wanted internal improvements. He wanted the federal government to help subsidize the building of canals, the building of roads, and by the end of that, there were also railroads. Well, continuity is this constant desire to build these transportation networks and a thought of the federal government helping. The change is where the federal government finally, after the Civil War, does start to do this. Pre-Civil War, they didn't do it, right? Southern states' rights policy, you can't do that. That's against states' rights. After the Civil War, you don't have that issue anymore. Now they're starting to get involved in helping to create a more modern America. This is a famous photograph you've probably never seen before. This is the Central Railroad meeting the Pacific Railroad in Ogden, Utah. This is east meeting west. And now you have this moment. You can get on a train, the railroad in New York or in San Francisco, and within a week or so, you're on the other side of the country. This revolutionized transportation, and the federal government helped. The federal government also is at times weary of capitalism and often pro-capitalism. We're going to look a little bit more in class at these two cases. In fact, we'll mention them again when we start talking about the agrarian revolution, ironically enough. This has a lot to do with farming. MUN is a railroad company, and the state of Illinois tried to regulate or control them. Supreme Court case 1877, due process, right? We're going to talk about what due process really is in our class setting. But using due process, procedural due process, Supreme Court ruled in favor of the state of Illinois. But 9 years later, another railroad company, Wabash, brings up this idea of what's called substantive due process, the substance of a law. Is it fair? Is it applied equally? And they overturn their 9-year decision in MUN and begin to realize the states cannot regulate the railroads. And this is going to cause a lot of dissent in America when this happens, but we can start to see with these two cases the federal government at various levels becoming more and more pro-capitalist, more and more pro-industry. Also, an effect of this is the changing of time. Imagine a world where you live in and you lived by local time, where you woke up, it's 6:30 in the morning, and you know you have to be to school in an hour. But one of your friends lives in a nearby city or town, and it's actually 6:42 in the morning where he's at, which isn't that far from you. Who's going to be late, right? Because maybe the school itself is in a different city that you're going to go to, and by their clock, it's only 6:20 in the morning. It can get so confusing. Imagine taking a railroad, and in this time period of growing industry, you have to get from Boston to Philadelphia at a certain time. And Boston time is 2 o'clock, but at Philadelphia, it's only 1:55. But you're riding on a train that actually originated from New York City. In New York City time, it's 2:15. How are you going to figure out what time you're supposed to get to Philadelphia? This becomes a problem. So the railroad industry petitioned the federal government to pass the Standard Time Act. And we get standard time, Eastern time, Central time, Mountain and Pacific time. You might notice the state of Florida was originally in Central time. That's because it went by the geography of the railroads. Railroads didn't come down here for a while until a Mr. Henry Flagler will build a railroad, putting Florida and Georgia into the Eastern Standard Time afterwards. So even time will change as a result of this growing corporate world. Very fascinating, maybe, sort of, kind of, I don't know. Hopefully you all haven't fallen asleep yet. I tell you what, let's take a break. Go get yourself something to drink. I'm going to drink some iced tea right now, and I'll wait for you. You're back. Okay, cool. Now let's go to letter B. We're going to be B and B for a little bit here. We see again, and you see I got a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 multiple choice questions. Business made use of what? Well, technological innovation. Thomas Edison, the light bulb. Now, we've talked about this in class, and we'll talk about this again in class. Edison did not actually invent the light bulb. He's going to help to produce a commercial viable one. He is the culmination of hundreds of years of study that even goes back to Benjamin Franklin's kite experiment and what he discovered about the properties of electricity that will germinate in England and in France and eventually lead to discovery after discoveries and all culminate with Edison's commercial light bulb and the building of his company known as General Electric. He's also going to help to figure out how to record sound, which other people are already working on. He's going to realize that people have invented flexible film now, and if you take flexible film and you flash it real fast in front of your eyes, it looks like motion picture. So he's going to build the first movie studio in America. So a lot of innovation, not only for big business, but also for our own personal enjoyment is going to happen during this time period. We're going to get greater access to natural resources as we go west, more minerals, zinc, copper, iron ore, silver, a lot of silver will be discovered, redesign financial management structures, which we'll talk about in a few moments, and advancements in marketing. This growing labor force. Now, we'll cover that a lot when we talk about both the labor union and when we talk about the rise of immigration in America, but all that also is a cause for this rising industrial capitalist society that we have. But another great innovation I want to talk to you about is steel. Mr. Bessemer is actually from England, and that's important to take note of because we've talked about this before. Sometimes we like to kind of, acquire things from England. Let's just say that. So Mr. Bessemer, sorry, he figured out a easier way to produce steel. Steel had been produced on the planet for a very long time, but it's extremely a very hard process for humans to have done, let's say 1,000 years ago, let alone a couple of hundred years ago. Bessemer figured out a very cheap way by pumping cold air into the process to heat the iron ore up to even higher degrees and getting out all of the impurities and thereby leaving only steel. Now, why is steel important? For some of you who are a little bit more science-y type people, you got kinetic versus potential energy. And if you think about the kinetic and potential energy of iron versus steel, right, the higher I build on iron, the potential energy will be released a lot quicker than it would be with steel. And steel revolution now hits America. We're going to have skyscrapers, cable cars, expansion bridges. We'll build farther, we'll build taller. Then we have to build elevators. Railroads get improved. Railroads were first built with iron. Now with steel, it doesn't rust. It doesn't lose its potential energy. And so they'll lay up more track or dig up old track and put down steel now. This becomes a massive, massive important revolution in America that's going to lead to our big economic growth. Andrew Carnegie will be the steel magnate of the time period. This, by the way, is Chicago. Chicago is actually the birthplace of the American architecture movement and the birthplace of skyscrapers. But of course, New York City becomes famous for it because of all the land that they're going to have there to build their massive cities. Here is the Bessemer process for you. Again, I'm not really a science guy, but you see you're pumping cold air into the process. You're heating up this molten iron, and you're getting out all of the impurities, and eventually you get to pure steel. And massive factories are going to be built in the United States. You can also imagine the pollution that this is going to create for America and for a lot of the world as well. A very negative effect happens. Well, let's look at this redesigned financial management structures. The idea of capital good versus consumer good. Now, what does this mean? Well, you and I should know what consumer good is, right? You all want to go to Chipotle because it's your life, or you want to go to, get a hamburger after school or get a pizza after school. Well, those are consumable goods. You need to buy a pair of shoes. You need to buy lipstick. Anything that we have that we're going to purchase for ourselves, even cars and houses, are consumable goods. What's a capital good, though? What is that? See, capital is one of those words in economics that has multiple meanings. Sometimes we think of capital as money, which is true, but it also means, in economic terms, a good that you use to produce another good. See, men like J.D. Rockefeller over here, Andrew Carnegie that we talked about, they're going to focus on the capital good. Rockefeller focused on oil, right? Oil is the capital good. It is used to produce consumer goods. By controlling the oil in America, he became mega part of the 1%. And even less than that, he is so mega rich. Andrew Carnegie will focus on steel, a capital good used to make other products, right? That's what made these men true titans of industry. And they created new management structures. and redesign financial structures. Vertical integration, for instance, Carnegie, and he helped to establish this along with other individuals. They'll control every phase of a business from the raw material to the transportation to the manufacturing to the distribution of the product. That is vertical integration. You control everything. Men like Rockefeller, they're going to give us horizontal expansion and integration, buying out of competing oil companies. He starts to create the trust and the monopolies. That is horizontal. You go against Rockefeller, he is going to destroy you. He liked predatory pricing. In other words, he is such a big oil company, and then you come along as an oil company. He's going to go, you know what? I'm going to lower my price on oil to pennies on the dollar. Yeah, I'm going to lose millions of dollars a day, but I'm a massive industry. Can you afford that? Once you realize you couldn't, then he basically took you over, right? And if he felt kind maybe at the time, he'd let you stay on as a manager. Or if you wanted to fight him, he might try to make sure that not only did you go into poverty, but your great-grandchildren might go into poverty. This is going to lead to, when we get to period 7, the rise of the muckrakers, a woman named Ida Tarbell, whose father will be hurt by Rockefeller and the oil industry. She's going to become one of America's prominent investigative journalists and help to expose much of Rockefeller's shadier business practices and eventually help to break up his company. So again, cause and effect for you right there. Let's get into letter C here. We talked about advertisement, right? What is going to happen is the average workers, their real wages do start to increase. We're going to talk about the labor movements, how they help, but this growing middle class is also happening in America. The title of Mr. becomes extremely important to a lot of men at this time. They couldn't get the title of doctor or something else, but that title of Mr. becomes very important. And they want to start to dress like they have made it. And advertisement starts to come along. This is you can see right here from 1890 and 1891, advertising the new styles in men's clothing. And this becomes a big deal for a lot of people. New access to a variety of goods and services, as you see here in our concept. The standards of living do improve at this time period, but we are going to see a massive gap emerge between the Carnegies and Rockefellers and Cornelius Vanderbilts of the world and us. Right? That's going to happen as well. We're going to get into the labor movements in the next video production that we'll do here in just a little while. And we'll end it here in letter D. Here we get the expression large trust, right? Or the monopoly. We talked here about John D. Rockefeller using horizontal integration. You build a board of trustees, right, that hold stock in all combined firms as a single entity. You're taking over other oil companies. Eventually they start taking over other things, like maybe a railroad company gets taken over, as trucks come along, they'll take over a trucking industry, maybe a shipping industry, and they'll hold them in a trust, a board of trustees, creating monopoly, which eventually, by the end of this time period, a progressive liberal movement will happen that starts to go after these things. And Theodore Roosevelt will become the president who will lead this charge in regulating industry that will culminate with Woodrow Wilson, really bringing a lot of regulation and trying to break up a lot of these trusts and monopolies. This is Cornelius Vanderbilt. He's one of America's first real mega rich guys. He did it in the railroads. He started in the steam line industry and the ferries, with like in Staten Island across the Hudson River. Then he sold a lot of his interests and got into railroads. He got into say this 5 times fast. Railroad war with a James Fisk and a Jay Gould, and he won. Right? And that's kind of what this is showing here. I believe this is Jay Gould here, and this is James Fisk. And Cornelius eventually became the king of the railroad, or the Colossus. I don't know if you learned that in world history, the great statue Colossus where the ships would come through its legs. So that's Cornelius Vanderbilt. And a lot of these guys we'll talk about became philanthropists. He'll eventually donate, I think it's $1 million in the time period. I could be wrong about that number. And build Vanderbilt University in the state of Tennessee. Right, a lot of these very rich guys eventually get either schools named after them, libraries named after them, concert halls named after them. So yeah, so this was the rise of industrial capitalism. Be looking on Edmodo for the worksheet that goes with this. And we'll do some very specific things in class, based on what you already know here in the key concepts. All right, everybody, enjoy the rest of the day, morning, evening, whenever it is you're watching this. I don't know. Bye-bye.